Welcome to this episode of Human-Centered AI, where we speak about all things, not what to think about AI, but how to think about AI. And so, of course, being human-centered AI, we talk about not only issues with AI, but we also talk about issues with human-centeredness. And perhaps you have seen this week people talking about Deloitte having, in fact, not an artificial intelligence problem, rather a human intelligence problem. Why is that? Because we have seen that Deloitte had something around the marks of 440,000 Australian dollars for a report with essentially hallucinations and quotes and books from people who don't exist on topics that they have never written on. So we're going to talk a little bit about not necessarily, of course, the obvious things, but we're going to go a little bit deeper and talk about what perhaps can we learn from this. And also, how can we be better, essentially, as a species? Because for me, that's what AI is all about. It's not just about faster processes. It's about how we can also be better people. Adele, would you like to weigh in first?
No, but I have to.
Yeah, please do.
So the thing, or the central theme about the Deloitte, let's say, challenge, to call it mildly, is that right now there's been this hype of doing artificial intelligence, and the hype, of course, is paying off. So you have these accelerators, this engine than ever. However, I think the shot is quite long if you don't pay attention to each one of the steps. Because in one hand, you can say, okay, make a report, I'm going to charge a lot of money for it. Enter, right? But at the end, you might want to check it. And the reason this situation happened is because one of these researchers actually started reading it and discovered there was this citation, and there's this doctor that is mentioned, doesn't exist, with this book, with an amazing name. I said, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. So in one hand, what is the alternative? You ask your assistant, make me a report, enter, and then what? You receive the report, and then you have to read it again and verify all the answers. That will be the most obvious thing. However, if you do that, then the speed gets reduced to the maximum speed of the analyst who's reading the document again with human speed. So to balance those aspects is kind of the tricky thing.
Right, so it's not, okay, give it to AI, AI does everything, or let's have every single person read every single word or something, and then we're basically operating again at human speed. And I think this is really key. This moment is not about a gotcha moment, like you used AI. My minimum expectation is that you're using AI. The question for you as the Big Four consultancy is then no longer, how many reports can we publish? Rather, how can we bring value to our customers in a different way? So I think that's an interesting point, which is it's not about using AI blindly or slowing it back down to human speed. It's finding that balance.
I think of course, there are many ways to control the output. One of them is to setting milestones that you can verify. Like, let's say when you make a plan to do whatever, a building, and when you're, let's say, building the floor, the engineer might tell you, hey, I think we should reserve this space for the electrical connectors. And you may say, no, the plan doesn't say anything about electrical connectors, so two things can happen. You adjust, you move forward, update everything, and keep working on it. Or you just work blindly towards the plan, and then at the end you discover that you were missing some electrical connectors. Right? The same way when you want to go to a destination, you open your map. You say, I want to go from here to downtown, and then as you're moving forward, something happens and there's a blockage, a road blockage. So you have to work around it. So creating these mini milestones, the analogy is trying to get points of certainty. At the beginning of this year, the scientists in Japan released the annual report, right? The Artificial Intelligence Future Signals 2025 report. Ta-da! Jamie, can you show it? This is to Jimmy and to Joe Rogan. I know he listens to us.
So we released our report.
This report was released. The report was not only released like with the output, but we also released the methodology. We openly, or the thinking openly declared that this was an artificial intelligence assisted or generated with the assistance of artificial intelligence. That was the point, to prove the depth, to prove the movement, to prove the quality and the execution of combining two straight forces. An interesting part, of course, is this architecture. And you might say, okay, it looks kind of funny. The thing that I want to highlight is two, let's say, blocks. This one's in, let's say, light red, pink, right? One of them has to do like you get the sources and you have to check them.
Just 1 second, Adele. For those that are just listening, I will put it in the show notes. But what we're going to walk through essentially is a flow diagram or a workflow of the technical architecture that we use to write our future signals report.
Yeah, that was one architecture like the way used back then. Yes, absolutely.
Just giving that context for anyone that's listening only with audio and not watching.
Yeah, that's a good point. So with this architecture, it's like the high-level steps that we're following. One of the steps is, okay, what are our sources, right? Regulatory developments, investment patterns, like you have also market analysis, academic research, patent fillings, right? So declare what are your sources. I think that's important because if you say, go and find me anything, then you will end up with books that doesn't exist.
Yeah, okay. Step number 1. Setting expectations. I think setting your technical expectations, I think, is super key. One other thing that I think is very important because of this is, for example, something that's really pressing for Big Four companies or Big Four companies, really anyone, but especially the Big Four consultancies. Whereas this is what they essentially used to sell. This was, they used to sell people and kind of, fancy reports. Now that anyone can do this, okay, what's then now their value? And I think one of the really interesting conversations, one of the maybe level setting points at the beginning of a project for those kind of Big Four organizations, or really anyone that's engaging with a customer and using AI, is here's how we're going to use AI. So being transparent about that at the front. So what you're walking through here is, for example, the technical architecture, but I also think, just as a parenthesis, as a side note, I think it's also very interesting to be able to level set with your customer about your AI usage, so that at the end, you just kind of mentioned setting up milestones, but also being upfront or being transparent about your transparency in a way. So like saying, this is our plan, this is how we've safeguarded it, this is our response, for example, I think is also quite key, even before anyone has even touched an LLM, for example.
And I think this is valuable or relevant for any kind of organization, or even at the individual level. Artificial intelligence are essentially statistical models. Like you have a percentage of certainty, and based on that certainty, then you produce an outcome, an output. So you could say, I could generate a document that has a little bit of, let's say, of variability, and then you might accept or not. Okay, 90% in 2 weeks is acceptable, or 100% if in 1 year or 6 months. How big is the risk? It's up to you to decide, right? But these models work with this kind of probabilistic inference. Even when you generate the sentences, works in such way.
So let's jump back to our technical architecture. So we're beginning with, first and foremost, we're mapping out what data do we want to access, or do we believe that's within our value set or acceptable to us as an organization, right?
Yes, as anything, internet is full of information, but not every source, every website, every blog is really something you might want to consume. Maybe yes, right? But it's also up to you. What is the information you want to consume? Second part, when you do this, is what we call the classifier. You have to cross-domain patterns to identify what is happening, what is the commonality among these, let's say, among these sources. What are the things? Because I think that's a good step. Of course, there's many ways to make a report. This was one way that we decided to show. Of course, they're more complicated, they're more rich ones. But in this case, we want to cross-identify what are the patterns that are happening there. And then through some other AI techniques, trying to find clusters, trying to find groups, we try to identify those non-obvious signals. I think that's the richness also from a report, that you don't have what everybody knows. Yeah, I know that, so why are you telling me this? This is what we know, but this is what we're not observing. This is the hidden magic.
This is all, hidden magic. I think this is where companies can really lean in and offer their unique value, secret sauce, whatever you want to call it. Because if you were to ask or you to engage with an LLM, for those that are familiar, if you're not familiar, you can basically think about it as an entire set of data, and the LLM will essentially take the median response, or take the middle. So you won't get necessarily overtly one way or the other way, we'll just get standard responses. But I'll get the same responses, and probably somebody else is going to get similar responses. So when you are highlighting or positioning yourself as a thought leader, as many of those that listen to the Human-Centered AI series are, this is where you can really define your value and create things or identify newness, as we kind of say, that perhaps hasn't been uncovered yet.
Yes, and the interesting part is that the AI will spit something. Because the maximum of and when I'm talking about the AI in this moment is, let's say, your agent or your LLM, your chatbot, your GPT version, right? Because at the end they have to deliver. They're obliged to give you an answer. They're obliged, at least by default, to be helpful, right?
Not correct, helpful.
Helpful. They designed to make to be eloquent, right? To be truthful. Imagine is for example, Grok. Their maximum is to create the LLM with major truth relevance. That means that by default they're not truth seekers, but eloquent developers, right? Or developing eloquence. So once that, let's say, I'm moving forward to this intuition that we have was, okay, you have your sources, you start to identify common patterns, check them. That's one of these blocks. Like we have a feedback that we have to check what is it going on, right?
That's happening where?
Here in the center. Like you have these pattern recognitions, you start identifying them, and you have to feedback. Whatever you're getting, is it working, is it not working? You're getting the information that is relevant. Are you getting some hallucinations, which might be bad, but maybe not bad? Because hallucination is another way to say imagination.
Interesting. Yeah.
Like, what are you saying? Cars can drive themselves? Are you hallucinating? Having maybe a burst of imagination. So, depending on what you're looking for, hallucination might be a good thing, a respected thing, or an undesirable thing. But in any case, I think it's advisable to get ready. To be ready for that behavior, right? Then optimizing it. As you're optimizing it, of course, the report or the information, the interaction gets better. What gets next? The human expertise. What are you getting? Who's going to validate this, right? What if I ask you, hey, can you make me a multiplication? 2 by 2. If I don't know anything about basic arithmetic, algebra, math. If I tell you 10, is that all right? Right? We used to joke about this. What is 1 and 1? 2. No, 1 and 1 is 11. Ha ha ha, joke, right? So.
Well, then there's the other thing. 1 and 1 in the human context can be 3 if you have
a family.
2. Yeah, you can have a family.
You have a family. What's 1 and 1, right? And you have in even languages, right? Interesting combinations. Still, the relevant part is you need an activity to validate the outcome.
What would that look like specifically?
In the past, an academic level, when you went to school, you used to go to school to learn how to do the homework, right? Right. I think soon or right now, if you're going to school, you need to learn how to validate the homework. You need to check that the homework is well done, right? How do you identify a well-cooked steak? How do you identify a sunny day? How do you know it's going to rain? There are things that you can verify the process, but there are things that you can verify the output.
This is so interesting, especially around leadership or management. So traditionally, management has been management of human beings. And if you read lots of, for example, the management journals or text, it really leans to how to motivate intrinsically somebody, for example. However, we're looking at AI agents, for example.
Yeah.
we don't have to consider personality disorders or work-life balance or anything like this. So I think how we manage AI, or what management is going to look like, or leadership is going to look like, I think we're really going to have to like diverge and have really two schools of thought. One, of course, is the management and leadership of human beings, but then I think we're going to have to do really quite a lot of work surrounding what is the proper or appropriate management of, for example, AI agents or even just AI in general. And I think that's going to be really interesting. And again, as you bring it back to the report, quite valid here. Okay, we've gone and we've said, go and pull the information. What do you as a person who's managing these agents, what management principles, what leadership principles of the project or of the agents themselves are you implementing in order to make sure that you get that desired result that you would, those same metrics that you would have if you were leading a human team, for example?
Well, it's like I don't think there's like a standard way or like a best practices yet. This is quite new.
Oh, no, absolutely. This is what I'm saying. So I'm saying that this is where it's going to go. We're going to have to do like a big lift, the same way that we've written for hundreds of years on leadership of actual people. Probably we're going to have to do that at least for agents as well.
Yeah, so as we're discovering how to interact with these systems, because they're like a expedite, they're very immediate to give you the result that you want, which at the same time is good. But imagine it traveling at warp zone, right? For us that like sci-fi, like traveling at super high speed is nice, but if you don't calculate the location, you might end up in the middle of a star, right? Or with your face in an asteroid, a meteorite, in any form. So, considering the tasks that you want to ask, it's not simply just, I want you to produce a document. It's which lenses I want you to wear when you're searching for this. Because if we're searching for, let's say, an event can be presented in many ways. If it's presented for a kid, we have seen all these videos in YouTube, or right about the Wired 5, when there's this celebrity explaining quantum physics to a
what they do for
1 year old, like toddler,
first grader
to appear,
grader, PhD,
to appear, right? So imagine the same way. What are the lenses that I need from this report, from this information? What is the output that I'm looking for? What is the behavior that I'm looking and expecting from you? So what do we want this? This is the context. What's the role that I want you to play with, right? What is the task or the action, right? What is the format that I'm expecting this information? How am I going to validate it?
And on validation as well, and also context. When we are producing these, multi-100-page documents, how important is the context window in the management of these kinds of reports?
Yeah, I think it's contextual. There's a joke also that I saw on X, right, on Twitter. It's like I only have this sentence that I want to send, this summary sentence that I want to send, but it doesn't look too professional. Dear LLM, can you make it more complete so I could send it over? And a few pages, send it. And then the guy who receives it, this is too much for me to read. Dear LLM, can you summarize it in a couple of sentences? Right, so it's like this back and forth one. I think the funny part for me is, do you really need to be that long? Do you really need to be that short? Right? What is the purpose of this document? Like maybe the document is one sentence that is very clear, that takes us to the right direction with evidence and with empathy, and the rest of the documents is the evidence to support it. So documentation has to be with a purpose, not to the purpose of you're paying me a lot of money, so I should deliver a lot of paper.
This is actually quite critical. So the production of these multi-100-page documents pre-LLM was a very heavy lift, required entire teams of people. You had to produce it. It was a big lift, and therefore almost, you could argue there was some justifiable means for the prices. However, now when you can create, let's say the cost of data or the cost per word is quite low.
The cost per token,
yes.
the gigawatt per hour.
Yeah, it's really quite low. this is, for example, when you have to take a step back and say, even if we come back to the architecture, I think, you always have coming back to that, that we were talking about, that what makes you unique or your special sauce, for example. What does that look like? And I think if you can put the architecture back up again, and I think that's really why we wanted to share how we were able to, for example, approach this same thing, because it's no longer about did you use an LLM, yes or no. The answer is obviously. It's the same way if someone wrote a book and I said, did you use a computer? Oh, you didn't write this by hand. That means you didn't write a book. Or if you flew somewhere, oh, you didn't walk here. You didn't really, you were cheating. So I think kind of overcoming this idea that AI is some kind of cheating, but really comes back down to, much more that point of literacy, both the literacy of the people using the LLMs, but also recognizing that the customer literacy is much higher, or that there's an expectation there as well. And then coming back down to not just producing reports for the sake of reports, but rather for the sake of trying to say something or uncover things. And I think this is really interesting. We've seen that we can, simulate, particularly when it comes to whether it's science or mathematics, we've been able to see or developments or acceleration in science from what would have usually taken a decade can now take much shorter time. So I think coming back to these reports, there is of course always going to be some kind of necessity to produce newness. I mean, as humans, that's what we try to do. We try to push the knowledge barrier just a little bit with every day that we live. But making so and seeing how to use AI, I think is going to be really important.
Yeah, I think things are it's clarifying. Things are starting to we're learning also how to use these tools more effectively, more in a more harmonious way among us. First, what do you want this report, as we were saying, right? You said it's about managing expectations. Like if you said you go to a destination and you use a car or a subway, hey, you cheated because you used the subway. Well, depends. Are we talking about going to that destination, or are we talking about running the Boston Marathon?
Right. So if you're running the Boston Marathon, you say I'm running the Boston Marathon, and you drive, it's much less impressive.
Yeah. I made 15 minutes, right? Wow, right? What happened? I took the bus. Why do you run, right? It is not, it's a...
That's not the point, yeah.
That's precisely the expectations. Maybe the expectation is do it by hand and doesn't matter. The expectation is using tools. Oh, okay, so we know we can expect that. With the risk, of course, everything encompasses some sort of risk. If you're entitled, and this is something that all of us should consider, if you're entitled to review something that is existing, and so be it, you have to review something that is existing, right? You have to make sense of it. If you're entitled to review something that is existing and imagine a world of possibilities, so be it, then the combination is infinite.
Right. So very similar to our last episode of our Lawson KDDI episode. No one's particularly asking us, but we're going to give our 2 cents all the same. What are some things that we can maybe learn? So that's, for me, that's always the game with AI. It's not just about faster processes, it's about also better people. So that's always for me such a key factor. How can we be better after this? What are some things that we can maybe learn, or what are some things that you'd perhaps keep in mind if, someone were to do a similar thing again?
I think the main question is, why do you want this material for? Why do you want this report, this summary, this paper for? Second question will be, by when, right? These are the obvious things, but sometimes people forget about them. They just some people want just to make it fast, right? Boy, you have 1 week, you have 4 months. I know that you're using LLMs to summarize, but you have 4 months, right? Maybe you can make it less. I know that also people tend to maximize the time that they have available for a task. That you give them 10 years, they will use 10 years. But my point is finding the balance to optimize things, but also not putting things at risk. I think if you're not making sense of what you're seeing, you're going too fast. It has to make sense for you. So you have to know what's the purpose, your time frame, the speed is making sense of what you're getting is a good thermometer or a good tachometer, velocimeter, speedometer. Second is how are you going to, let's say, ground proof or cross-reference, cross-validate. No matter how you see it, I think using AI to generate information, documentation, validation is a win-win. Because the benefit that you get from the speed, it's unmatchable. So no one will, let's say, go back to the old, let's read it, let's open the encyclopedias and let's go line by line. Nobody's going to do it. Yeah. However, knowing where to check, you reach this milestone, go there, check, it's here, check. When we talk about, let's say, cellular communications, when you're sending a package, data loss, package of information to other entity, you have to check. Am I receiving it complete, in time, in speed, in format? And these small blocks makes a lot of difference. Maybe you lose one, but the package loss, if you lose a little bit of data in your Spotify song, it doesn't make sense. I mean, doesn't disrupt anything. Also, they kind of invented this thing, how to receive partially lost information, so you could listen your music at any moment, maybe with low quality. So everything is contextual, but we have to find the right balance of value.
I think this is also prefaced with having these conversations about your engagement with customers or clients up front. This is our approach. This is how we're going to check in with you. This is how often we're going to check in with you. These are maybe the guardrails that we follow, for example. I think this is something that needs to happen pre-project, not post-project when there's an issue.
Nobody loves surprises. I don't.
No.
I like problems. I don't like surprises.
Right. And I think, this is, ever so present. I always like to come back to kind of like natural examples. I mean, in Japan, we don't say, how do we stop earthquakes or tsunamis or whatever? It's more like we have a plan before the earthquake, what we're going to do. Everyone knows, right? So I think it's something quite similar to that. And one of my favorite questions to always kind of reflect on is you don't promise AI to your customers. What are you promising that AI will deliver, right? So what's the kind of value that AI is going to bring? So don't worry too much about AI itself. Think about what you're going to be doing with it. What promises can you keep that you would never have been able to deliver on previously, for example?
And the things, I think when we were talking with a good friend of ours that's part of the Google DeepMind ecosystem. And he had, of course, it's a high performance team. He was sharing with us some very gentle analogies, like how AI for them is materials, and of course makes a lot of sense. Because going back to the...
Do you want to expand on the material analogy?
Yeah, because when you want to develop, let's say when you want to develop a solution, so I want to make a table. You look around and see what materials do I have. First, why do you want this material? What's the task that you want to perform? I want to be able to put fish and not to slip around. Okay, so I need some friction surface that helps me out, that is easy to clean.
So glass table, for example, is not a great
glass,
option.
maybe not, maybe metal, maybe antioxidant,
stone, for example. Yeah.
Like there's materials that you might use it. Similar way, when you want to develop a solution, a task. What is the task? What does it look like? What's the purpose of it? And then look around, what are the tools, what are the materials that you have around. Of course, a tool and material depends on what you're aspiring. Going forward, or going back to the analogy of the delivery company, the carrier company, they don't tell you, the car will deliver you this.
Oh, this is the kind of cars we use, for
this
example.
This is the car, because of these cars. I'm going to deliver tomorrow 7 a.m. to your dumpster.
Yeah, how you do it's up to you. I don't care if you have someone bicycle over here.
Bicycle skipping the route, the promise of the bicycle. I mean, the use of the bicycle in high density locations was amazing because it could skip traffic and move things around. That were the delivery guys in New York in the 90s decade. It's still happening. They move around and they make things flowing back and forward, right? So knowing that the AI might be an enabler, as we said, a tool, a material, but unless you're selling raw material, like I'm selling a stone, this is the stone that I sell you, and this is the AI that I give you, right? Might be important to reframe what is it that I'm using and what am I using to enable that promise.
And with that, thank you for this week's Human-Centered AI series. Our goal with our Human-Centered AI series is not to share with you what to think about AI, rather how to think about AI. We are tech optimists, we are also human optimists, and with that, anything that we see, whether it's something that's gone really well or something that's gone really quite poorly, we like to comment with the lens of what can we learn, how is this making us better, not just faster.
See you around.
See you next time.